Hi folks, in this video we begin our examination of Nietzsche with one of the topics that he's most famous for, his critique of religion. A bunch of the passages that you read for today are from his work, The Gay Science, which came out in two different editions. In 1882, the first edition had a lot of the work in it, but the second edition in 1887 added a whole nother chunk of aphorisms, of additional material, and a new preface. And a bunch of the stuff that you read is from that additional preface. What I want you to do, start out thinking about is, what is Nietzsche's central metaphor? He's a difficult philosopher to understand and to get into because he writes in such a literary and metaphorical manner. Oftentimes, he just layers metaphor upon metaphor, and it's incredibly difficult to figure out what he's talking about. So let's start unpacking those metaphors, because by understanding them, we can understand his key central philosophical claims. So what is the biggest metaphor that you find in these passages that you read for today? I want you to pause your videos and actually look at the texts again and try to think about this. What is the most important metaphor that he keeps returning to over and over again in these passages? Okay, I'm going to talk about the answer now. I hope you paused your videos. The central metaphor is about the contrast between health and sickness or illness. Notice what this is health and sickness. It's a condition of our bodies. So there's a physical manifestation to it. It's metaphorical on the physical level, but already there's a double layer to this metaphor, because health and sickness are then symbolic of our spiritual state or the state of our souls or our minds at the same time. We saw Dostoevsky use this exact duality to add a lot of depth to his own writing. Nietzsche is doing the same thing. So let's look at some of the places where this comes up. He starts the second edition preface. So by preface, what I mean is the second edition preface you were reading. And number one, this refers to Nietzsche's aphorism numbers. So every section of Nietzsche's work has a number to it. And I will refer to his quotes by the aphorism numbers rather than by the page numbers. So in preface section 1, he is mixing all of these ideas together. This concept of convalescence, of being ill and getting better, is really what he keeps returning to. And that is connected to another metaphor, that of spring and the cyclical nature of the seasons, and how spring is associated with a whole nother set of concepts, like the concept of birth and regrowth, or a rebirth and growth of the natural world. So the way in which the earth comes alive in spring is functioning as a metaphor for the way in which Nietzsche is describing himself as coming alive and coming out of a cyclical dark period. You know, the winter is associated with darkness and with illness, and unhappiness and struggle of surviving, barely surviving. So Nietzsche is mixing like 4 different metaphorical concepts here together. And what this is supposed to give us a sense of, what we're supposed to start to think about, is what is the positive vision that we're getting out of this? The positive vision in his philosophy has to do with the recovery of the earth and with health, bodily health. So we have a connection. He's aligning himself to the concepts of health and the physical body, and the success of the earth and the growth of the biosphere. So again, I just give you another quote to show you it's not just section number 1. In section 2, he says, you know, what is it to us? This is in quotation marks because it's in the voice of like a imagined interlocutor or somebody in conversation with Nietzsche. What do we care that Mr. Nietzsche has become well again? So let me give you some more quotes from preface number 2 to see where he goes with this, because the concept of health versus sickness is going to be central to his critique of religion. And you can't really understand his critique of religion unless you understand how this metaphor works. Because, so check out this quote. He's talking about the views espoused by philosophers, and the same thing, we're going to ask these same questions of religious figures too. What are the kind of values that they espouse? Do we rank peace above war, or have a negative definition of happiness? Do we have some final metaphysics, like some final state in heaven or something of the sort? Does our religious and aesthetic craving posit an apart or beyond, an outside or above? Notice what these things all are. These things are contrasted with the earth. What we mean by apart is we mean apart from the earth. He's talking about a heaven or a state, a state of nirvana, a state of otherness outside the natural world, beyond or above the natural world. Any views that, whether they're philosophical or religious, notice he's combining here concepts of religious or artistic values and philosophy. Any of those systems of thought, those systematic approaches to nature and value, we can ask for them. Do they spring from sickness or do they spring from health? So firstly, the concept, the metaphor of health versus sickness is working as a barometer or a way of measuring, taking stock of systems of value. And he's going to tell us that some of them actually spring from illness and are sick, and some of them are healthy. Now, you can already sort of get a sense for the ones that he's going to say are sick. After all, I told you this is going to connect to his critique of religion. Well, think about Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam. I mean, those four religions alone constitute like 99.9% of religions on earth. But in fact, the other 0.1% of religions subscribe to similar thoughts too. So what is the fundamental contrast that Nietzsche's talking about here that's common to all of these religions? Well, there's this concept of the physical world. There's a duality between the physical world and then some other world or state, the apart, the beyond. Whether in Hinduism, it's like ultimate reality, which yourself will eventually merge if you attain the right state. In many religions, it's the concept of God, like the Abrahamic religions, like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, which are paired especially clearly in Christianity and Islam with this concept of heaven, and with heaven as an otherworldly place, or whether or not you envision it physically otherworldly, it is fundamentally distinct in contrast with this earth. Even Buddhism has the same set of ideas. In Buddhism, your earthly desires are just the source of strife and unhappiness. And actually what you need to do is extirpate them from yourself. You need to escape from desire, and that will allow you to attain this otherworldly state, this state that gives you transcendence, the state of nirvana. So the physical world is irredeemably bad in Buddhism, and all the desires attached to it are so as well. Now, remember, Nietzsche talked about philosophers too. So don't think he's just heaping scorn on religion here. He's at least consistent in the sense that any philosophy that holds a similar duality between earth and the other and prioritizes the other, Nietzsche takes the exact same attitude. So philosophers who do that are just as bad as all the religions that do that. And Plato is like the arch philosopher who holds this sort of view. Although, in fact, the vast majority of philosophical views from modern and medieval and ancient philosophy might have similar strains to them. But in Plato, it's really clear. Plato posits this realm of the forms. And I highly encourage you to check out Plato's Republic or the Phaedo or some of his other mature works where this view is really clearly developed. The realm of the forms is transcendent, and it's distinct from the realm of the physical world, the sensory realm. The realm of the forms is immaterial and immutable. It's unchanging, and it's the source of all good and all value. And the physical transient world is actually just the source of problems. It's just it's ignorance, and your body as being part of the transitory physical world is deeply problematic, and the desires of the body are problematic. And what you need to do is recover your knowledge that you had previously before becoming embodied and escape back to the realm of the forms. So Plato actually has this kind of dualistic metaphysics which prioritizes the other to the earth, exactly like many of these global religions. Plato's view actually has been really compared to the concepts of reincarnation in Eastern religions, as well as many Christians later on were amazed at how this pagan philosopher from hundreds of years before Christ could have come up with a view that's so consonant with Christianity. So Nietzsche is on a lot of solid ground and has a lot of precedent for seeing these religious concepts from both Eastern and Western religions as being versions of them present in Platonic thought. Now, what Nietzsche wants us to do about these sets of values, and this is the way his metaphor of sickness and health works, is he wants us to ask and separate really two separate questions we can ask of these views. Because the simple question is this true? Like, should I buy it? Is Plato right? is there these two realms, in the realm of the forms and the realm of the physical world? This is the way in which many religions are approached, as questions of metaphysical truth. Is it true that the Christian God exists? This is like the fundamental question of philosophy of religion or of theology. This is what's the constant debate between science and religion, you might think. It's the question just about metaphysics. Is there some reality out there in which God exists? Is heaven real or not? That's the question of truth, of what's the fundamental nature of reality. Nietzsche actually, he's concerned with that question, but not fundamentally. In fact, a huge shift in perspective he wants us to engage in is to not prioritize this question anymore. He wants us to ask a separate question, which is, what do we learn from examining the type of values promulgated by philosophers or religious figures, whether it's Plato or Christianity or Buddhism? What is, take Plato's views about the world, about the realm of the forms and the physical world, and let's take the temperature of that, or let's use this measuring, let's diagnose it. I guess, a barometer, I said, is one thing, but really a thermometer is maybe a better metaphor, because the thermometer sees whether or not you have a fever, and maybe is a way of diagnosing whether you're sick. That is exactly what Nietzsche wants us to do. What do we learn about Plato's view of life, Plato's priorities, when he's telling us this is the fundamental nature of reality and the system of value? He wants us to really step back and not just ask about the truth of those views, but about what they tell us of Plato the philosopher. He wants to treat those views as symptoms for the state of Plato's health, or the health of the set of values that Plato is putting forward. And you see this dual perspective throughout the Nietzsche reading, although sometimes it's really hard to get. So he says, often I've asked myself whether, taking a large view, philosophy has not merely been an interpretation of the body and a misunderstanding of the body. Plato's views, this is Nietzsche taking Plato's views as symptomatic of Plato's own state of his body. Notice how Nietzsche is continually coming back to these metaphors of the earth and the body, and Nietzsche is prioritizing the earthly side, the bodily side. It's Plato's physical sickness Nietzsche is diagnosing is the source of his view that the earth is actually condemned, is damnable, and instead we need to escape to the heavenly realm of the forms. Okay, let's look at some other quotes about this shift in perspective for Nietzsche, because this shift is really essential to understanding both the health metaphor, I think this is what it's doing, and thereby his critique of religion. So here's going back to that previous quote. See, this is what Nietzsche is asking us. Think about these religious cravings for the apart, the beyond, the outside, above. This permits the question whether it was not sickness that inspired the philosopher. So Nietzsche isn't asking, is it true that there actually is an apart or a beyond? He's asking us, what kind of view of life would lead people to endorse this system of value? And his hypothesis, or the theory he's going to put forward, is actually, it's a rejection of earthly life. It's a kind of sickness. Asceticism, which lies at the root of all of this, is actually a disease. That's what Nietzsche is going to really tell us. That's one way of cashing out what this metaphor comes to. Here's some other really explicit places he talks about it. He says, in some, it's their deprivations that philosophize. And notice he's not just talking about religion here. He's being fair, at least, to the philosophers too, and heaping as much scorn on them as he does on religion. The contrast, of course, in others, it's their riches and their strengths. So in this video, I'm talking about the negative side of Nietzsche and his critique of religion. We're going to see that the health and sickness metaphor actually has a whole nother side, a positive side. But it's going to take us some time in order to get to those ideas. Here's one more really good quote from preface number 3 that talks about the need for nirvana. Well, if that's where we're at, Nietzsche says, then the trust in life is gone. Life has become a problem. And he connects that exact same perspective with the sickness of the body. So part of this shift in questions from truth to questions of value, I think what Nietzsche wants to see is that there's power plays behind this. There are hidden power dynamics, hidden motives that lie behind system of values. And in this sense, Nietzsche was way ahead of his time. And these ideas that he's putting forward became hugely influential 100 years later. in the following century, Michel Foucault, a French philosopher, really made a lot of this and was directly inspired by Nietzsche. But this talk about hidden systems of value and hidden motives, this actually was a direct inspiration for Freud too, who admitted in some places that he owes huge debts to Nietzsche. I think, in fact, Freud didn't fully fess up to all of the debts that he owed to Nietzsche. So what is going on with these hidden motives? Well, check out this quote. What Nietzsche says is, the thing that's at stake isn't just truth. So this is question number one. This is him really being explicit about the distinction I'm making. It's something else: health, future, growth, power, life. So the way in which the health versus sickness functions is the way in which, the metaphor, in my opinion, is what allows Nietzsche to shift focus from just questions of truth to questions of the value of the philosopher, or what is the well-being of the person and the set of views that are promulgating this denigration of the earth and the priority of heaven or the beyond or some other realm. Now, there's an irony here. So let me say, this asceticism that Nietzsche is critiquing, there's something very subtle in his critique of it, because you might say, how can it be, if views are serving health or are serving power in life, if asceticism is one of those views, if religion is just a power play, it's a power grab by people positing the value as not values of the earth but elsewhere, how could that actually be in the service of life? If life is about, trying to find more power, then how could the rejection of life actually be a power play? How could it be in the service of life? Nietzsche is well aware of this irony, and in order to explain it, he actually, explaining that irony forces him to do some of his most interesting philosophy. Now, I said the second edition preface that we're reading is from 1887. That exact same year, he published another book called On the Genealogy of Morals. So the exact same time that he's writing this preface, this whole other book is the other project he was working on, and the two are intimately connected. His perspective in the two is actually is the exact same. And it's in that other work that he fully develops an answer to this. The trouble is that other work is really long, incredibly complicated, and it's really hard to just sample from. So I didn't try to make you read, his 300-page answer to this question, but I'll just tell you what it is, and I'll give you the 60-second version, so you understand that he actually is deeply indebted. He's deeply interested in confronting this paradox and explaining it. I mean, basically what he says is, imagine a world in which might makes right, a world in which, early civilization, humans are trying to come together for the first time. And oftentimes, the different Greek city-states, Nietzsche actually by training studied ancient languages, and he devoted most of his career to studying ancient Greece and ancient Mesopotamia. So he was a real expert in the study of ancient civilizations. And but what he does is he develops a lot of speculative philosophy on interpreting what they're doing. So his views on ancient history are not necessarily to be trusted as great historical science. But what he does is he develops a really set of interesting philosophical views for the contemporary world, informed by these views about ancient civilizations. I mean, what he says is, in ancient Greece, the Spartans and Athenians, all these ancient city-states were constantly at war with each other, and the more powerful ones would dominate. So they were in this situation where might makes right. And what humans did with the development of ethics is they found a way for people who didn't have the physical strength to actually conquer the people who did have the physical strength. And he really develops this story as a way in which Christianity conquered Rome. Because remember the times, I mean, if you are familiar with the New Testament at all, remember that Christianity was a sect. It was a religious offshoot of Judaism, which was the Jewish people in ancient Rome were not considered full Roman citizens. They weren't, accorded all the rights. They were like a conquered people, under the Roman Empire, far off in Italy, hundreds, 1,000 miles away. This small sect, this small band of Jewish people who founded Christianity were completely out of power. And that's in a sense why Jesus gets crucified by the people in political power. And you have all this talk about Pontius Pilate and the Romans in authority in the New Testament. But lo and behold, a couple of hundred years later, Christianity conquers Rome. I mean, here we see the Pope standing in the Vatican, and you can see the sea. All of these buildings are owned by the Catholic Church. Think about a few hundred years later, how much power the Christianity has. And it does this. If you're interested in the history, you should look at how Constantine in the 3rd and 4th century of the Common Era converted all of the Roman Empire to Christianity. It's a really fascinating and complicated history. And what Nietzsche is saying is, in very subtle ways, putting forth ethical values, putting forth this value system in Christianity actually did allow the people, the religious people, to conquer the secular people, and it allowed this sect, this offshoot of Judaism, which had absolutely no power. It had so little power that the Roman government could literally publicly crucify their leader and face no repercussions. They had that little power. They were that disenfranchised. And yet a couple of hundred years later, they conquer half of the world. And now it's the largest religion on earth. And think about the wealth concentrated in these religious institutions, not just Catholicism. Think about all the wealth in the Vatican, or think about all the wealth in the Mormon Church, or all of the wealth in American Protestant churches. It's incredible how much power religion has. This is exactly the idea that Nietzsche sets himself to try to explain. And he thinks that actually asceticism is a way of people who lack the physical ability to conquer others. They're not, the Christians of the early centuries didn't win the way that Spartans won. They found a different way to win, by systems of value that required the powerful people to actually stop persecuting them, and instead put all the value in another world, in heaven. So this way in which systems of value can be very complicated and can have hidden motivations, can have hidden agendas, and actually, paradoxically, by preaching the relinquishment of power and the denial of physical satisfaction and bodily pleasure and the rejection of the earth, can ironically be a way of conquering the earth, and can be a way of gaining physical power and material wealth and all of the other things that Nietzsche is associating with Christianity, at the time that he's writing in the late 1800s, where Christianity really was this dominant social institution in Europe. So let me return then to answer the fundamental questions that I set to you. So what I want to do is help you understand the health metaphor, health versus sickness, and how this functions in Nietzsche, and how this connects with his critique of religion, because I think that's one of its fundamental purposes. Well, it ties to this idea that you've already seen in Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard, this idea that asceticism is bad. Asceticism for Nietzsche is sick. It's a form of illness. Because what it is it's a rejection of the body and a rejection of the earth. And according to Nietzsche's systems of value, we need to not just ask, is Christianity true or false? Or is Plato's philosophical view true or false? We need to instead ask this separate question. Is it the kind of thing that we think springs from strength and happiness and life? Or does it instead spring from resentment and degenerating bodily states? Of course, this is metaphorical. This has nothing to do with the Pope being physically ill. This has to do with the state of his soul, the spirit. And by talking about health, by putting it into a physical metaphor, this precisely is going to be the mechanism by which Nietzsche himself promulgates or puts forward a different set of values. He's in the business of putting forth values, just like Christianity is and just like Plato is. But he's going to put them forward in a way that champions the earth and champions the body and health. That's going to be the way in which this negative side of the metaphor, talking about asceticism as a sickness, is going to then segue and lead to his positive philosophical view. Okay, thanks.